We'll go through. All right. Hello. Happy Monday, everyone. Thank you for letting us come and talk to you guys today. We're going to be talking about mental health and wellness. My name is Shlok Karod. I am a clinical psychology doctorate student at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and this is my colleague, Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Jones. I'm a licensed therapist, addiction specialist, life coach, and I've been a colleague of Shlok's for over 4 years. Very excited to be here. To go ahead and get started, if you take nothing else away today, I want you to take away these 3 points. Number 1, stress and mental illness is normal. It's not the exception anymore. Number 2, therapy works, and it works exceedingly well. I'm very excited to tell you a little bit more about that today. And 3, self-care, or things that you can do in addition to therapy, even in the workplace, are really crucial to your mental and emotional well-being. Shlok, do you want to talk a little bit more about mental health?
Yeah, so a big part of our presentation today, we want to kind of normalize mental health challenges and difficulties that people can go through. It's very, very common. And a lot of this, next slide. A lot of this is a result of our lifestyles. Busy lifestyles can put a lot of demands on us, both physically, mentally, and emotionally as well. And it can affect everything. I mean, you guys know, a stressful job, a stressful academic, career, anything like that, can have effects on other parts of our life, our relationships, our work, our physical health, family lives, whatever. And so it's really important to kind of find a balance between all that, if possible. And stress is kind of a general catch-all word, I guess, that we use, right, for the mental, emotional, and physical tension that we experience. But essentially, our bodies will try to adapt to any physical or mental state that we are in and really try to balance us out. And if we are overwhelmed by a lot of stressors, then that can be a really difficult thing to do. It can get really tough, and sometimes it becomes overwhelming. And that's when you see a lot of mental health difficulties kind of come to the forefront.
Absolutely, and that's what's really important here is the fact that stress leads directly to many different components of ourselves, right? So not only the way that we feel about ourselves, but also our physical bodies, our behaviors, and things like that. And it's all interconnected in this really dynamic way. And I think it's really important whenever we're talking about stress, whenever we're talking about mental illness, that we're not just looking at one side of it, we're taking it holistically. And so, for example, let's say you have a really tough week at work. All of a sudden you'll go home, realize, hey, I'm not socializing that much. I'm staying in, I'm eating a lot of ice cream, whatever it may be. And then there may be a thought of, oh, maybe I am stressed. And that's a good example of how everything's connected, even though you may not even realize it initially. And so one of the main things that we want to talk about today is just acknowledging that stress and mental illness are things that impact all aspects of our lives, certainly both personally and professionally.
And another aspect is we talked a lot about how mental health difficulties are normal. And so that's something, again, we want to emphasize. These are common things that people go through on a daily basis. And a lot of times people that are dealing with mental illness or mental health difficulties can feel really isolated and feel like they are alone in their struggle. And we kind of wanted to put some statistics up because that's really not true. It's actually a really common thing. 1 in 5 adults in America will experience mental illness. 1 in 25, it'll be something pretty severe. And a lot of this begins by age 14 and age 25, your early teen and early adult years. If you think about it, that's when you're going through a lot of changes in your life. You're trying to find your identity and your career, et cetera. It's a very stressful period of time. And so it's no wonder that a lot of times this is when these mental health difficulties kind of come to the forefront. A lot of people in America live with major depression. It's one of the most common things, not just in America, but worldwide. And 42 million live with some sort of anxiety disorder. And that can be, anything from panic attacks to social anxiety. It could be like, fear of public speaking, even things like that. That all kind of fall under that umbrella. So again, these are very common things that people go through. And it's important to keep in mind that, if you're experiencing some of these, you're not the only one. And there are other people out there and there's support out there and people who kind of know what you're going through that can relate. And that can be an empowering thing.
Absolutely. And in fact, whenever we talk about depression, we talk about anxiety, it actually results in a lot of lost productivity, which is a problem not only for leadership and management, but also for your peers, because you're creating an environment. And I think it's important to keep in mind that not only do you impact the environment, but the environment impacts you. And so whenever you open up a discussion about mental health challenges or about stress, you're creating a space and a dialogue that can allow people to come forward and get the kind of help and assistance they need, as opposed to suffering in silence. One thing that's really important is that suicide is highly correlated with mental health challenges. And in fact, the statistic here says 90% of people who complete suicide have underlying mental health challenges. And suicide, like mental health, is something that makes us really uncomfortable. It's something that we don't like to discuss. It has a lot to do with our fear of death and mortality, things like that. But the key point here is that it's a process. It's something that just about every single adolescent at one point thinks about. And so today, our point isn't necessarily to focus in on that, but it's to create a dialogue so that we can have these conversations that are vital to our well-being. And in fact, suicide, mental health, and stress are all things that need to be discussed so that we can be the best people we can and the best professionals we can.
And just to reiterate that, there's a lot of stigma around both mental health and suicide as well. And these are conversations, as Matt said, are really difficult, and so we try to avoid them. And that's kind of counterintuitive to what you want to do if you know of someone struggling with something that's maybe even a little more severe or not. It's important to, I think, talk about it if they're willing to talk about it and not avoid it, because I think avoiding that kind of conversation is one of the worst things you can do. And so if you're experiencing stress or mental health difficulties, what are some other things that you can do? Therapy. Therapy works, okay? And there's a lot of stigma around it, but we are here to, kind of break that down a little bit and just point out that, I mean, if you're sick or you break your arm or something, you go see a doctor, why not do the same thing when it comes to your mind? Scientific research, I mean, there's loads and loads of research that proves how effective therapy is. And that's, it doesn't matter what kind of condition or diagnosis an individual has. Therapy is important and effective for anything and everything. And it's not really, due to it doesn't change with the diagnosis. It doesn't change with, the type of therapy. It's really based on the individual coming in for help and the therapist and the relationship that can be co-created there. And if you guys can put some, good work in, if you and your therapist can, chances are you're going to see a lot of benefits from it.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite things to discuss are, the fact that it does work so well. There are a lot of studies that, as graduate students, we get exposed to. Some of those studies have to do with comparing, say, a medication with therapy, and then the combination of medicine and therapy. And a lot of that data actually shows that short term, the best thing that you can do is to both be on medication and be on therapy. It's highly effective for everything, including anxiety and depression. But what those studies don't tell you is what I consider the most important point, which is long term. The benefits that you gain from traditional therapy outweighs all those other methods. So the benefit of doing therapy is that you're not only working on one level, you're working on multiple levels, which I will explain here using an example. But the other thing is that you're not going to have to keep going back to a psychiatrist that doesn't like you, that sees you for 10 minutes. You're going to have an hour, you're going to be able to get into some things and do some real work on a long-term basis so that then you don't have to continually go back in. And to illustrate this point, whenever someone comes to see me for anxiety, for example, I can give them tools right then and there in one session that they can take with them and use the rest of their lives. Things that can help them, whether it's breathing techniques, little tweaks about how we're thinking about things. And these little interventions within one session can help that person for the rest of their lives work with their anxiety. Additionally, if they want to see me longer than that, then we can do more in-depth work to actually go to the root of the problem and illuminate that, talk about it, process, work it through, and in fact, alleviate it at its source so that then your anxiety levels go down even further, hopefully for the better part of your life.
And so let's talk a little bit about myths about therapy, because as I said at the top, there's a lot of stigma around it. So here's some myths, and I'm going to go through and break those down and them anymore after this. So first, therapy is for crazy people. That's not true. And kind of going with the second point, it doesn't mean that you have a serious mental health problem if you go to see a therapist. I have clients come in for time management things, relationship issues, just trying to be a little bit more organized, things like that. I think going to see someone, there's a lot of stigma like, oh no, I'm going to be labeled as crazy. And that's a really harmful word because that takes away from a lot of the experiences that people are dealing with. And I think it's important to keep in mind that really it just means that you're a little overwhelmed at this point in time and you need to go talk to a professional. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, again, we go to doctors if we're sick, if we can't get better ourselves, why not do the same thing when it comes to our mind? Seeking help makes you weak. I vehemently disagree. I think that it's a strength to admit that, okay, I can't handle this at this point in time, so let me go talk to someone. And I think it's a kind of a personal stigma that we have against ourselves because we don't want to seem vulnerable or weak. But I think that it's actually the opposite because you're admitting to yourself that, okay, I need a little bit of help dealing with this. Therapy is not laying down on the couch and talking about your mother. It can be if you want it to be, but chances are it's not going to be. And I've never had a client that has actually done that. And I don't know about you, Matt.
Me neither.
No. All right. Not what therapy is. But again, if you want to do that, then you can talk with your therapist. And therapy is not simply just talking. You're actively working with them, trying to co-construct an intervention, either on a smaller scale or a larger, longer-term scale, like Matt alluded to. It's really not just sitting there and talking about nothing. You're figuring out an active way to deal with what you're going through and get tips and get help in terms of what you're dealing with and understand where it's coming from. And that can be a really short process. That can be a really long process. It looks different for everyone. Therapy will look different for me than it will for Matt, than it will for any of you. And then last but not least, your therapist will interrogate you with invasive questions. No good therapist will do this. We are on your side as therapists. We are there to support you. We are there to create a comfortable and caring environment. And it's there are times where therapists will challenge you in an effort to maybe try to help you grow, right? And maybe see a different perspective. But it's not going to be some invasive questions. They're not going to try to create an environment where you feel attacked or anything. That's exactly the opposite of everything that we strive to do.
Absolutely. And staying on this for a minute, the one thing that I also want to emphasize about the whole talking thing, like first off, we're experts. We're bringing a lot of tools to the table. And second, what's really important is that as you're talking to someone, it's extremely different than talking to a friend, a colleague, your family, your own internal dialogue. It's an emotional process, and it involves a lot of different feelings, thoughts, experiences that are going to come up whenever you're sharing this with someone who's giving you their undivided attention. Which brings us to another question, which is, what is therapy? And I say that if nothing else, it's an opportunity for you to meet with someone who's giving you their undivided attention and expertise. It's a time for you to practice what you preach. A lot of us read self-help books and we think that they're awesome, or we read stuff on Inc. magazine, we get inspired. But the most important part is taking that and putting it into action. And so I think it's a great opportunity for you to do that and to become more congruent. And additionally, it allows you an opportunity to work through whatever's going on in your life currently. And you can work through things that you went through in the past that are difficult that you still want to overcome. Or on the future and things that you want to do and have more goal-oriented work. Those are all things that therapy can be used for. And you can do all of that within an environment that feels safe, that feels supportive, and that's really creating a foundation of non-judgment so that then you can, it's really hard to describe, but it really is. But it's a really safe, supportive environment, and it's one of the few places on earth that it's completely confidential. We are bound to legal and ethical
Guidelines,
yeah. Thank you, that we have to adhere to. So it's one of the only places on earth that you can say whatever you want with no repercussions, and it's not going to get posted on social media.
It sounds pretty great. And so there's a couple of resources that we wanted to throw up here. Hopefully we can get the PowerPoint circulated to you guys somehow, or at least the couple slides that have information on it. There's a lot of websites that you can go to that can help you really narrow down finding a therapist should you choose. You can, think about it. If you go on, I'm going to liken it to Yelp. All right. If you're looking for a restaurant and you click on all these filters saying like, all right, I want Italian food with this price point, with, in this neighborhood, things like that, you're going to find a pretty selective list of restaurants. This is kind of the same with these websites, right? You can filter it down by insurance, by gender, by sexual orientation, by what they work on, whether it be trauma, depression, relationship issues, time management, whatever. Find a list of therapists that you can work with or that you can go see. And I think it's important to also note that if you go to therapy and have a bad experience or just don't get along with the therapist, that can turn a lot of people off from therapy. But I would encourage you guys to try to stick with it and try to maybe just find a different therapist, because you might not find a therapist that you like on the first go around. But once you do and you have a connection with the therapist that you can build over weeks or months or years, you will be able to do some really good work, both on yourselves and just in your life in general. So that's something to keep in mind, that, to think that just one bad session with one therapist will mean the same thing for all therapists. Mm-hmm. And then, you can also just Google Chicago area therapists. I've done that, and there's just you'll get 100 plus thousands of therapists. So very easy to find them, and a lot of resources at our fingertips.
So this leads us to another question, which is, other than therapy, since not all of us choose to do that, what are other things that we can do to improve our mental, physical, and emotional well-being? That's a thing that we call self-care. Self-care is basically actions or behaviors that allow you kind of a space to revitalize yourself, to gain energy, whatever that means for you. And these behaviors are typically things that are helpful in, like I said, helping your emotional and physical well-being.
Yeah, and so, just looking around here at Power Reviews, I think that you guys have a great environment in the workplace in terms of opportunities for self-care. But I think it's important to keep in mind that there are things that we can do ourselves too. And they're really simple. They're things that you kind of don't think about. Examples include take a short walking break, stand up from your desk for a minute if you're really frustrated or stressed or you just feel tired. Stand up, get your blood flowing, walk around a little bit, walk outside now that it's finally hopefully nice out for an extended period of time. Spend less time looking at screens. We a lot of us spend all days, even in our field, kind of hunched over our computers and staring at phones and TV screens and whatnot. It can put a lot of strain on you mentally and on your back and everything. And that just, it can add up and have some really adverse effects physically and mentally. So, take a break, step away from it, and give your mind a breather, so to speak. Mindfulness breaks. If you go on YouTube and type in guided mindfulness or guided meditation, there are so many videos that you can just put your headphones in and take. You basically just have to listen to them for 5-10 minutes, longer if you want, and it's a really effective tool to feel refreshed, get a mental break, and be able to go on with the rest of your day with some more motivation and more alertness and feeling refreshed. Light stretching. Some breathing exercises would be great, and then drinking lots of water and eating healthy food. I know you guys have a nutritionist coming in later this week. Very important for mental health as well. Proper nutrition and hydration can affect so many parts of our physical and mental well-being.
And those are all things that you can do here in the office. And there's also a lot of things that you can do outside of the office in addition to all of these listed here. Other things you can do are various forms of exercise. And I believe I saw on the website that there's a gym in here. Is that accurate? That's awesome. I'm very jealous. So I recommend actually using that. And a lot of different companies that have innovative workspace, a lot of those different areas are underutilized. And so I really challenge you today to take advantage of that and to use that so that you can continue to better yourself. Other things you can do: reading books, vastly underrated. All intelligent people read books. The people who really innovate aren't just reading regurgitations, they're reading the original content. I recommend that you do the same. Another is journaling or writing. It's a really valuable skill today, and it's going to continue to evolve. I think as society progresses more and more, and there's this integration of the digital realm, that skill is going to be really, really valuable. Another thing, massages, great, love them. Sleep hygiene is another thing that is directly connected to both our mental capacity and our emotions.
Yeah, and just to say a little bit more about sleep hygiene for those that are unsure of what it is, basically you want to formulate some good habits around bedtime so that you can get the best night of sleep possible to feel refreshed. lack of sleep can have a lot of adverse mental and physical effects. I mean, think about the last time that you didn't get a good night of sleep. How did you feel the next day? You know, tired, groggy, lethargic. I mean, you couldn't concentrate or focus, couldn't motivate yourself to do these things. It's tough. I mean, it's really tough. And that's because we're not well rested. Our minds and bodies are not well rested. So habits such as limiting screen time before you go to sleep, which I get it. I mean, it's hard to stop watching some Netflix show sometimes. I do the same, but it's really important. It's a good change to make. Limiting light in your room at bedtime. You want a really dark and quiet environment. Things like leaving your bed for just, a place to sleep and relax, and not like taking your laptop and doing work in bed, so that your mind's not, constantly thinking about things. And there's so many other tips. You guys can look them up, I'm sure. But it's the whole point is to kind of foster an environment where you can really relax and just shut down at the end of the day, wake up feeling refreshed, and you keep that bed or that room as that one spot to rest. And so the overarching theme of our presentation, as we kind of get to the end of it, is your mental health is just as important as your physical health, and you need to take care of it. And we understand there's a lot of stigma around it, but hopefully presentations like these can kind of educate some people and allude to the importance of how we are affected by things we don't even think of and what we can do about it. We also wanted to include some crisis resources. So individuals with mental health difficulties may experience crisis situations. In many cases, crisis situations can lead to dangerous behaviors, and in rare cases, suicide as well. Below are resources to contact. So there's a bunch there that are very common. Again, just having this on hand for, if you know anyone who's dealing with something really tough or dealing with some mental health challenges and is experiencing a crisis, these are really good resources to pass along to them, be it a family, friend, loved one, whatever, colleague. And then the website over there also has, these resources and a lot more for physical and mental health challenges. So if hopefully Power Reviews can send you guys this information just to have on hand. I think it's just good to keep around.
Absolutely. And now to conclude, the 3 things I told you to remember that I hope that you're going to continue to take away from today are: first, stress and mental health difficulties are normal. They're not the exception. We live in a state of constant anxiety, surrounded by screens, in a world where we're trying to achieve maximum productivity at all times. So that's a great environment that's going to have an impact on how we feel. So it's important to recognize that the way that we react to that is not abnormal, it's normal. Number 2, therapy works, and it works extremely well, and it has long-term benefits that far surpass medication. 3, self-care, or things that you can do for yourself to gain energy, that you can do both in the workspace and at home, are incredibly important to your mental, emotional, and psychological well-being. With that said, thank you very much. Our contact information is up on the screen. We've very much enjoyed this opportunity.
Yeah, and at this point, if there's any questions or concerns, you can ask them right now. You can come up and talk to us. We'll stick around for a little bit, but thank you for having us out and you guys listen.
Thank you.
How does self-talk affect stress?
That's a great question.
I just turned my thing. There we go. All right. How does self-talk affect stress? Well, I think a lot of times when we're in situations where we're experiencing a lot of stress, we have the tendency to become really critical and negative on ourselves. If you think about it, just liken it back to a situation where you're really frustrated with any work you were doing, things, simple things like, why can't I get this? Or why is this taking so long, can kind of snowball and add to being very self-critical. And you might think of that as, on one hand, maybe motivating ourselves to okay, let me just get this done. But really, it's kind of putting up a roadblock saying okay, I'm not good enough to get this done in this point of time. And that can really exacerbate the stress. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because both of those things arise at the same time, or one can cause the other. So in terms of chicken or the egg, it's always both. And I think what makes it such a great opportunity for working with us is the fact that we can then approach either one of those. So we can work on the stress directly and give you different exercises to relax and to alleviate stress, or we can work on the thoughts that are also making the stress more challenging.
And I think a lot of times too, when we're in those situations, we might not realize the connection, between the two. So going to a therapist or even just taking some time to reflect on what's really going on when you're feeling really stressed out, it can point new things out to you, and or the therapist can, and things you didn't think of, or just maybe thinking about it in a new way, that can really help to alleviate, whatever's going on. So,
Thank you.
any other questions?
Cool. It's interesting that you said sometimes people go to therapy for time management.
Yeah.
So, what type of things would they be working on? Why are they having trouble getting all the things done that you'd like to get done, or maybe you're overzealous with your goals?
Yeah. Well, I think
Stuff like that.
those.
That sounds very interesting. I never would have thought to go there.
Right, and it's that it's. I think the general point also is to kind of highlight that, like, it can be really anything that you need to come in for, but time management. Yeah, I mean, I've had people come in to talk about how they're struggling just organizing their entire schedule and everything, and it's some of the things you said. They just take too much on, and they just don't realize that they probably don't have enough time in the day to do like 20 different tasks. Or it can be that they're, overzealous with their goals, or just not being effective and not understanding why they're not being effective. Talking about it and figuring out, okay, like, this is a pattern I'm noticing. This is maybe what I see that's going on in all the tasks that you're taking on, can really help to be like, okay, well, I didn't think of it in this way. It's a little different for everyone, so there's no, I guess, real perfect coverall answer, but it is important to know that, these little things that we don't think of, it can really be beneficial to go talk to someone about it.
And another thing that I'd like to point out is I also mentioned that I do coaching on the side, and most of the clients that I work with are really motivated through like career goals or things like that, like whether it's leaving their 9-to-5, doing other ventures. And the thing that's always interesting about it is, if you remember when I was talking about the way that stress impacts us, it impacts us holistically in complex ways that we don't always recognize. And so you may come in for productivity, and that is the thing that you truly want to work on, and yet that may be connected to a lack of downtime, which may be connected to difficult self-talk or things like that. And so it's all connected in a way, so no matter what we're working on, it's A, going to help, but then B, there's many other avenues that we can explore. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you again.
Thank you.